thank you. And thank you for coming today. This will be a very interesting panel with two authors who have written books that may on the surface look quite unalike, but I think share very interesting affinities. I think that the woman who just gave us the fine introduction may have mentioned that you should turn off your cell phones if you still have them on, so if you would please do that. What we'll try and do today is we'll have a little bit of a conversation about the two titles, and then at the maybe for the last 15 minutes or so, if you have questions, we'll take them, and you can address our two panelists during that part of the conversation. I'd like to welcome to the stage right now our two authors, Edward Ball and John Glassie. Edward Ball's new book is entitled The Inventor and the Tycoon, A Gilded Age Murder and the Birth of Moving Pictures. And Edward Ball is the author of 4 works of nonfiction, including Slaves in the Family, which won the National Book Award. He lives in Connecticut and teaches at Yale University. And to my right is John Glassie, who has written the new book, A Man of Misconceptions, The Life of an Eccentric in an Age of Change, which he does not include the name of the subject that the biography concerns, so I will give it right now. Athanasius Kircher, I'm going to say Kircher, but I think it should be Kircher, although we've already had a discussion about the way to pronounce this man's name correctly. John is a former contributing editor to the New York Times Magazine. He lives in Brooklyn and is the author of the photo book Bicycles Locked to Poles, and has contributed to a number of terrific publications as well, so I want to welcome both of them. Now, as I said, the two subjects of these, and in the case of Edward Ball's book, really his two subjects as well, so we'll say 3 subjects, are very much men of a very particular time. One is a Baroque polymath who flourished in the Jesuit culture of knowledge in the 17th century, the author of 7 million words, all in Latin, and who already by the end of his life was considered something of and by many people, a charlatan, a crank, and a bit of a mad genius. The other was a photographer who was transplanted west, took himself west, already well into his adult life, having gone through 3 professions leading to that, changed his name 6 or 7 times. I may have lost count of the exact number of names that Edward Muybridge underwent in the course of his career before he found his calling as a photographer, and went on to incredible fame as someone who can conceivably lay credit to the birth of the moving picture. And along the way, he also murdered a man, which plays a very interesting and complex part in Edward Ball's book. His life intersected with that of Leland Stanford, one of the great robber barons of the 19th century, fabulously wealthy man who was the owner of the Central Pacific Railroad and also had an incredible love of horses. And that gives us a little bit of a way to talk about our story and to get into both books. I'll start with John. You wrote very, very early on in your book, you say, Kircher was so prolific and so ingenious that he might have been remembered as a kind of 17th century Leonardo. The problem was that he got so many things wrong, and this is where the terrifying part comes in. And skipping down, an apparently silly man, a somewhat untrustworthy priest, an egomaniac, and an author inspired one American historian to write in 1906 that, quote, his works in number, bulk, and uselessness are not surpassed in the whole field of learning, is perhaps not the most likely subject for a biography. So just to begin, I'd like to ask you, why then did you write his biography, and what were you thinking?
It's a very good question. I can say, first of all, when I told my family and friends I had a book coming out called A Man of Misconceptions, they all thought it was my memoir. But I had to correct them that, indeed, no, this is the story of this 17th century Jesuit who was a polymath, an author, inventor, very famous in his time, hobnobbed with popes, and influenced many of the sort of the great minds of the time, but he was fairly quickly forgotten after his death. Then, of course, the question would be, well, why write about somebody like that? He's a fascinating figure to me. As I say, he was an author who wrote 30-plus books, depending on how you count them. Many of them were 1,000 pages long. They were beautifully illustrated books, and they were the sort of the compendia of knowledge on whatever the topic was of the time. Magnetism, optics, music, astronomy, geology, Egyptology, kind of goes on and on. And as I say, many of the sort of finest minds, people we know who are now household names, unlike my friend, Descartes and Leibniz and others, and I contend Newton, had to contend with his ideas. He also ran this fantastic museum, sort of cabinet of curiosities in Rome, where he exhibited the tailbones of a mermaid and a brick from the Tower of Babel and other curiosities.
Automatons that vomited.
A lot of vomiting found automatons, actually. There was some Baroque fascination with vomiting.
Things,
Yes,
yeah.
gurgling things, regurgitation, which I've not bothered to look into too deeply. But the problem was, just as you suggested, he was sort of steeped in sort of the magic and mysticism of what we now think of as the pre-scientific period. He believed that magnetism was sort of a kind of divine energy. He believed in what they called natural magic and certain kinds of things that we would now talk about, we would now sort of say were occult. And he also happened to believe that mountains were hollow and sort of on and on. And so a lot of these notions were not going to sort of stand the test of time or the experimental method as science kind of began to develop. And I guess I was interested in him because he provides I wanted to sort of trace the life of this person against the backdrop of this period, which is a very important period. A lot of progress in science technology. As I say, it's the time of Galileo, Descartes, Kepler, Newton, on and on. And I thought it would be an interesting way to sort of open up this two-word phrase we have now for this period, at least in terms of the sciences and technology. We call it the scientific revolution. I guess my feeling was, or my suspicion was, that it was a lot more complicated than that label could really sort of suggest. So I thought it would be an interesting way to take a peek at how these kinds of transformations take place, and also to see how human beings who are sort of in the middle of them contend with them and deal with them and so forth. So that was, I think, the main sort of motivation.
Yeah. And Muybridge occupies a kind of similar place, I think, in terms of his historical position. He, is someone who we were talking about a little bit earlier, is really on the cusp of, certainly of a new way of thinking about the world and being able to see the world, a new, visual regime, if you want to use the sort of theory expression. But I think he's also someone who combines being very much of a showman with being very much of an artist and considering himself a scientist as well. Is that really what drew you into an interest in writing this magnificent biography or joint biography of Stanford and Muybridge?
Well, there might have been several things. I was drawn to it partly by looking around at our own situation today, in which we are bathed in moving pictures. We consume 6 or 7 hours of motion pictures a day in our television watching, in our telephone viewing, and our computer screen surfing. And there is one characteristic that holds all of these disparate media together, and that is, whereas cinema is something that you go to see in a film theater, and a computer screen